The first growl echoed down the stone corridor like a warning meant to stop hearts. Elara froze mid-step. The woven basket at her arm shifted, slightly dried lavender brushing against her wrist, its soft scent rising into the still air. She had been counting her tasks for the morning infusions, drying Rack's inventory, but the sound behind her cut through everything. Low, rough, trying to be terrifying. Every instinct in the Ironmark stronghold would have told her to run. Every guard would have stepped back. Every servant would have lowered their gaze and waited for orders. Elara turned around and smiled. Not carefully, not nervously, genuinely, because what stood behind her, small, crouched, trembling with effort, was not what everyone else thought it was. It was a child. Kale, the Alpha King's only heir, held his ground at the center of the corridor. His shoulders were too broad for his age. His claws already extended into the stone floor, leaving thin white scratches where pressure met fear. His golden eyes locked on her, waiting, testing, demanding a reaction. He growled again, louder this time. Stronger, practiced. 7 corridors away, alarms were already sounding. Lockdown protocol, royal heir in active display. The command rippled through the stronghold like a storm. Guards moved, doors sealed. Steel met stone, but Elara didn't move. She lowered her basket slowly and crouched to his level. Her movements unhurried, her palms open. "Oh," she said softly, as if she had just discovered something delightful. "You're practicing." The growl faltered. Not fully, just enough. Kale's ears twitched. No one had ever said that word to him before. Not dangerous, not aggressive, not a threat. Practicing? Elara tilted her head slightly, studying him with quiet interest. "That was a good one," she continued. "You're getting stronger." Behind reinforced doors and layers of command, Alpha King Kalor Ashvale stood frozen before the security feed. He had already issued the lockdown, already prepared for containment, already expected screaming chaos resistance. Instead, he saw his son hesitate, just for a moment, as if something inside him didn't recognize the script anymore. "What is she doing?" his second asked under his breath. Kalor didn't answer, because he didn't know. Elara reached into her basket. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out a small piece of honeycomb, golden and glistening in the morning light filtering through the high windows. She held it out on her open palm. "I don't know if you like this," she said gently, "but I think you deserve something for practicing so hard." The corridor went impossibly still. Kale stared at the offering, then at her, then back again. His claws remained extended, but he didn't move forward aggressively. Instead, he stepped closer, one cautious step, then another, until he leaned forward and took the honeycomb from her hand with the very tips of his teeth. Careful, deliberate, controlled. Kalor's breath caught. He had never seen that kind of restraint from his son, not once. Kale backed away 2 steps, and then slowly he sat down. The entire stronghold seemed to hold its breath, because the dangerous heir had just obeyed something no command had ever achieved. Kindness. Elara's smile deepened, soft and warm. "There you go," she murmured. "That's even better." Kale didn't attack. That alone should have been impossible. For 4 months, every report had said the same thing. Escalation, unpredictability, dominance behavior beyond control. And yet here he was, sitting on the cold stone floor honeycomb between his teeth, staring at the Omega girl like she had just rewritten the world. Elara didn't rush him, didn't reach, didn't try to touch. She simply stayed where she was, cross-legged now, her posture loose, her breathing steady. The scent around her soft lavender, a trace of wild honey, and something quieter underneath didn't carry fear. Kale noticed. Of course he did. He had always noticed. That was the problem. He noticed everything. Every flinch, every guarded stance, every subtle retreat when he entered a room. Fear had been the only language anyone ever spoke to him, until now. "You can have more later," Elara said gently, as if they were discussing something entirely ordinary. "But only if you keep practicing like that." Kale tilted his head. The honeycomb was already gone. He had swallowed it too quickly, but he wasn't looking for more food. He was looking at her, waiting. The corridor lights hummed faintly above them. Somewhere far off, metal doors disengaged, lockdown easing, but not fully lifted. Alara reached back into her basket again. This time she didn't take out food. She pulled out a thin length of braided cord, something used to tie herb bundles. She let it dangle loosely between her fingers. Kale's pupils dilated instantly. Every instinct in his body sharpened. Predator. Focus. Control. The shift was immediate, and this time it wasn't driven by fear. It was driven by interest. You see this, Alara said softly. She moved the cord just slightly. Not fast, not teasing, just enough. Kale leaned forward. His body lowered muscles, coiling not in aggression, but in anticipation. Alara watched him carefully. Go on, she murmured. Let's see it. He moved, fast, but not wild, not reckless. He pounced and stopped himself, right before impact. His claws, fully capable of tearing through reinforced wood, remained sheathed. He caught the cord between his teeth instead. Controlled, measured, intentional. Then, immediately, he looked at her, bright, expectant, waiting for something he had never been given. Approval. Alara's eyes softened. You got it, she said warmly. That was perfect. Kale's entire body reacted, not violently, not defensively. He wriggled. A small, unmistakable shift, like something inside him had just unlocked. Back in the command center, Alpha King Kalor gripped the edge of the console harder than he realized. His second started. I see him, Kalor said, his voice low. But what he saw didn't make sense, because that wasn't the son he knew. That wasn't the child described in 14 incident reports. That wasn't the heir who had sent trained guards stepping backward. That was a cub, playing. His mate, Queen Celine, burst into the room seconds later, breath uneven from running. Where is he? Kalor didn't turn. East corridor. She moved beside him, and then froze. Her hand rose slowly to her mouth. Oh, Kale had dropped the cord. He wasn't watching it anymore. He had moved closer to Alara, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, close enough that any wrong movement could have triggered everything the pack feared. But nothing happened, because Alara didn't change, didn't stiffen, didn't pull away. She simply kept talking. And the East Garden gets better light in the mornings. She was saying, her tone soft and thoughtful. You'd like it there. There are bees sometimes. Kale sat beside her, just sat. His tail rigid for months, always signaling tension, moved. Slowly, once, then again. Celine let out a broken breath. When was the last time he did that? She whispered. Kalor didn't answer, because he couldn't remember, because maybe he had never seen it at all. The sound that came next was quieter than anything before, a low, steady rumble. Not a growl, a purr, deep in Kale's chest. Contentment. It echoed through the corridor like something sacred, something that had been missing for far too long. Alara glanced down at him, her expression soft but unsurprised. Yeah, she murmured. That's better, isn't it? Kale leaned into her side. Not fully, just enough. Testing, waiting for rejection, waiting for the distance to come back. It didn't. She didn't move away, didn't correct him, didn't signal to guards. She just stayed. And that changed everything. Kalor straightened slowly. Cancel full lockdown, he said into the comm. Maintain perimeter. No one enters that corridor. There was a pause. Sir, that's an order. Celine didn't look away from the screen. That's our son, she whispered. Not the heir. Not the threat. Not the problem. Their son. Kalor swallowed hard, because for the first time in months, he saw it too. The corridor no longer felt like a place of danger. It felt quiet. Not empty, but full in a way no one had expected. Alara remained where she was, one hand resting loosely on her knee, the other absently brushing against the woven basket beside her. She didn't look at the security camera. She didn't look toward the sealed doors. Her attention stayed exactly where it had been from the beginning. On Kale. He had shifted closer now, not pressed against her, but close enough that the warmth of him reached her through the cool air. His breathing had slowed, the earlier tension in his shoulders easing with every passing second. But there was something else in him, a constant awareness. Every few moments, his ears flicked toward the corridor entrance. Listening, waiting. Alara noticed. Of course she did. "You keep checking," she said softly, not looking at him directly. "For someone." Cale stilled, not frightened, not defensive, just still. "You don't need to," she continued gently. "They're coming." 7 seconds later, footsteps echoed at the far end of the corridor, measured, controlled, but not quite steady. Cale's head snapped up. His entire body went alert, not in aggression, but in recognition. Alara followed his gaze. Alpha King Kalor Ashevale stood at the corridor entrance, not surrounded by guards, not flanked by command, just him. Beside him, Queen Selene slowed to a stop, her breath catching as her eyes locked onto the scene before her. For a moment, no one moved. The air held. Cale didn't growl, didn't retreat, didn't shift into display posture. He just watched, waiting, the same way he had been watching Alara. Kalor took one step forward, then stopped, because he didn't know what to do next. For years, every interaction with his son had been guided by protocol, distance, control, containment. There were rules for everything: approach angles, voice modulation, emergency responses. But there were no rules for this, for a child sitting calmly beside an Omega girl, looking at him without fear. Selene's fingers trembled slightly at her side. "That's him," she whispered, as if she had been afraid she would not recognize her own child. Alara finally looked up, not startled, not hurried. Her gaze met the Alpha King's directly, clear, steady, completely unafraid. "He's wonderful," she said simply. The words landed harder than any report ever had. Kalor's jaw tightened slightly. "He has been classified as a high-risk behavioral concern." He replied, his voice controlled, but quieter than usual. 4 months of escalating incidents. "I read them," Alara said. No defensiveness, no apology, just fact. And her eyes softened slightly as she glanced at Cale again. "And I think everyone was looking at the wrong thing." Silence stretched between them. Selene took a step forward before she could stop herself. Cale noticed immediately. His body tensed, not into aggression, but into uncertainty. Waiting, testing. Would she come closer? Or step back, like everyone else always did? Selene knelt slowly, every movement deliberate. Careful. Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "Good morning," she said. 2 simple words, but they carried everything she had not said for months. Cale didn't respond immediately. He watched her, his golden eyes searching her face, reading every micro-expression, every shift in breath. Alara said nothing. She didn't guide, didn't interfere. She simply let the moment exist. Selene extended her hand, not reaching, just offering. Open, still, the way Alara had done. Cale looked at it, then at Alara. A silent question, a silent permission. Alara gave the smallest nod. That was enough. Cale moved, slowly, carefully. He leaned forward and pressed his head into his mother's palm. Selene broke. The sound that escaped her wasn't loud, but it was raw. Years of restraint collapsing into one moment. "Oh, my heart." Her fingers curled slightly into his fur, hesitant at first, then more certain. Cale went very still. Then, he leaned in harder, choosing it, accepting it. Kalor's breath caught in his throat. He had seen battlefields, watched warriors fall, stood unshaken before rival alphas. But this small, fragile moment, unmade him. How long? Selene whispered, her voice barely audible. How long has he wanted this? Alara answered quietly. Since the beginning. Kalor finally moved closer, each step slower than the last, as if approaching something sacred, or something he was afraid would vanish if he came too quickly. Cale noticed him immediately. His ears flicked, his body shifted slightly. Not away, not forward, just aware, watching, waiting again. The same question. Would he reach, or would he hold distance? Kalor stopped a few steps away. For the first time in years, he ignored every protocol he had ever been taught. He lowered himself to the stone floor. No command, no authority. Just a man sitting in front of his son. He extended his hand. Open, still, waiting. Cale stared at it, longer than he had with Selene. Because this mattered more. Because this was the one he had been waiting for the longest. Because this was the one who always stood back. The one who never crossed the line. The one who watched, but never came close. Ilara's voice broke the silence gently. "He's been trying to get your attention," she said. Kaelor didn't look at her. By charging guards, he asked quietly. By speaking the only language that got a response, she replied. That hit. Hard. Kael stepped forward. One step. Then another. Slow. Measured. Intentional. He lowered his head slightly and pressed it into his father's hand. Kaelor froze. The warmth of him. The weight. The trust. It was so simple. And yet it felt like something impossible had just been placed in his grasp. He's... Kaelor's voice faltered. He swallowed. He's soft. Ilara's lips curved faintly. Of course he is, she said. He's 4. Kael shifted again. This time he didn't just lean into one of them. He moved between them, half against his mother, half against his father, unapologetic, certain, as if this had always been where he belonged. Selene laughed through tears. Kaelor closed his eyes briefly, and for the first time in months, the Alpha King felt something crack open inside his chest. Not fear, not control. Something far more dangerous. Understanding. No one spoke for a long moment, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be said had already begun to settle in. Kael shifted slightly between them, his small body warm against both his parents, completely unaware that something far larger than himself was unfolding in the quiet corridor. Ilara watched them, not with judgment, not with triumph, just with the steady patience of someone who had seen this moment before. Just not here, not in a royal stronghold, not with an Alpha King. You asked what I saw, she said finally. Kaelor lifted his head. His hand remained where it was, fingers still resting against his son's fur, as if he was afraid that if he moved, the moment would disappear. Yes, he said quietly. Ilara met his gaze. I saw a cub, she said, who learned that the only time anyone paid attention to him was when he was loud. Selene's fingers tightened unconsciously in Kael's fur. Ilara continued, her voice calm, but each word landing with quiet precision. Every time he growled, people reacted. Guards came, orders were given. The entire world shifted around him. She paused, but when he was quiet, silence answered for them. Kaelor felt it before he understood it, a hollow realization forming somewhere deep in his chest. Ilara didn't rush, didn't soften it. Nothing happened, she finished. Kael's ears flicked slightly at her voice, but he didn't move away. If anything, he leaned more comfortably against them, his breathing slow, steady, safe. He adapted, Ilara said, because he's intelligent. That word struck differently. Not dangerous, not unstable, intelligent. He learned that if he wanted connection, she continued, he had to become something everyone couldn't ignore. Selene shook her head slightly, her voice breaking. No, we were protecting him. I know, Ilara said gently. And she meant it. There was no accusation in her tone. No anger, just truth. I understand why you did what you did, she said. From your perspective, he was unpredictable, strong, capable of hurting someone. Kaelor's jaw tightened. He did hurt someone, he said, quietly. 2 guards. Minor injuries, but enough to confirm what everyone already believed, Ilara finished softly. Kaelor didn't respond, because that was exactly what had happened. The reports, the protocols, the distance, all built on a pattern that no one had stopped to question. Ilara's gaze moved to Kael again. From his perspective, she said slower now, more deliberate, every time he reached out. She paused, searching for the right words. Anas, the world stepped back. That landed, harder than anything before. Kaelor felt it physically, like something tightening around his chest. He's 4, Ilara said, not loudly, but firmly. He doesn't understand protocol. He doesn't understand containment strategies. He doesn't understand risk assessments. Her eyes lifted back to Kaelor. He understands attention. Selene let out a quiet, broken sound, and we taught him that the only way to get it, she whispered, was to be frightening. Ilara finished. Kael shifted again, adjusting his weight until he was more fully pressed against his father, now his head resting lightly against Kaelor's arm. Trusting, without hesitation, without fear, Kaelor's throat tightened. Because this was what had been missing. Not obedience, not control. What should we have done? He asked. The question came out lower than intended. Stripped of authority, stripped of certainty. Just a father asking something he should have known. Elara didn't hesitate. You should have answered him. Kaelor blinked slightly. When he made a sound, she clarified someone should have answered. The simplicity of it was almost unbearable. Selene shook her head faintly. But we did. We responded. We contained. You managed the behavior, Elara said gently. But you didn't answer the reason. Silence again. Kael's tail moved slowly against the stone floor. Once, twice, soft, content, unaware that he was undoing months of fear with every small motion. Elara reached for the braided cord again, letting it fall loosely near his line of sight. Kael noticed immediately. His body shifted, not tense, not aggressive, just alert, interested. Go on, she murmured. He glanced at her, then at his parents. Still checking, still learning. Selena gave the smallest nod. Go ahead, she whispered. Kael moved, this time faster, more confident. He pounced, claws sheathed, control intact. He caught the cord and held it, his eyes immediately lifting to them again, waiting. That same look, that same silent question. Did you see? Kaelor felt something inside him break completely. Yes, he said, his voice rougher now. I saw. Kael's body relaxed instantly. The effect was immediate, direct, undeniable. Elara watched Kaelor carefully. Learning is brave, she said quietly. He needs to hear that. Kaelor swallowed. He's been trying to learn this whole time, he said. Yes, Elara replied. And we... His voice faltered. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because the truth was already there. Selene pressed her forehead lightly against Kael's head. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Kael didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He leaned into her, accepted it, forgave it without hesitation, because he had never stopped wanting them. Not once. Elara stood slowly giving them space. Now not withdrawing, just shifting the focus where it belonged. To him, she said softly. This is everything. Kaelor looked up at her. And to us, he asked. Elara held his gaze. This is the beginning. The weight of that settled heavily between them, because beginnings meant something else too. It meant everything before had been wrong. And for the first time, Alpha King Kaelor Ashvale didn't resist that thought. He accepted it, fully, and that changed him more than any command ever had. The shift didn't happen all at once. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden declaration, no command that reshaped the stronghold overnight. It began with something much smaller. Kaelor stayed on the floor. That alone was enough to unsettle the balance of everything he had ever known. The Alpha King of Iron Mark did not sit on stone corridors. He did not lower himself without purpose. He did not remain still when there were orders to give systems to maintain control to enforce. And yet, he didn't move, because his son was leaning against him, because for the first time that contact wasn't forced by injury or protocol. It was chosen. Kael shifted slightly, pressing more fully into his father's side, now one small hand resting against Kaelor's arm, as if testing whether he would pull away. Kaelor didn't. He let his hand move slowly, carefully, the way Elara had shown him. Behind the ear, a gentle scratch, uncertain, unpracticed. Kael stilled. Then, his entire body softened. A low, steady rumble built again in his chest. Contentment. Real. Unfiltered. Selene covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling as she watched it happen. That works, Elara said quietly. Kaelor glanced at her. There was no mockery in her tone, no satisfaction, just calm observation. You're not doing it perfectly, she added. But he doesn't need perfect. Kaelor almost let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to a laugh. I've never done this before, he admitted. Elara's lips curved faintly. I can tell. There it was, something new. Not challenge, not defiance, but a kind of ease no one had ever allowed themselves in his presence. Kaelor should have corrected it. Should have re-established distance, authority, hierarchy. He didn't. Instead, he adjusted his hand slightly, following the way Kale leaned into the touch, learning the rhythm by instinct rather than instruction. The response was immediate. Kale pressed closer. Celine reached out again, her fingers finding his shoulder this time. No hesitation now, no fear, only presence. Elara watched for a moment longer, then stood brushing her hands lightly against her skirt. "You'll want to repeat that," she said. Kaelor looked up. "Repeat." "Every day," Elara replied. "Not once. Not when it's convenient. Every day." Her tone wasn't commanding, but it held something stronger than authority. "Certainty." Selene nodded immediately. "We will." Kaelor didn't answer right away, because he understood what she was really asking. Consistency. Time. Attention. Not strategy. Not control. Something far more demanding. He looked down at his son, at the small, steady rise and fall of his breathing, at the way Kale remained close without tension, trusting, without question. "Yes," Kaelor said finally, "every day." Elara studied him for a brief moment, measuring, not doubting. Then she inclined her head slightly. "Good." Kale shifted again, his eyes lifting toward Elara now. Alert, interested. He made a smaller sound this time, a softer growl. Less force, more intention. Elara crouched again, her attention returning to him instantly. "That one was better," she said. "You're controlling it now." Kale's tail moved. Kaelor noticed it this time, really noticed it, not as a signal, not as a behavior to be analyzed, but as something expressive, alive, responsive. He felt something twist in his chest. How many things had he seen, and never actually looked at it? Elara reached for the cord again, lifting it slightly. "Try again," she encouraged. Kale didn't hesitate this time. He moved with more confidence, more control. He caught it cleanly, and this time he didn't look just at Elara. He looked at both of them. Celine smiled through tears. "You're doing so well," she whispered. Kaelor nodded once. Yes, one word, but it carried something entirely new. Recognition. Kale's body responded instantly, relaxing again, the tension dissolving as quickly as it had formed. Elara straightened slowly. "That's how it works," she said. "He tries. You answer. Simple, clear, undeniable." Kaelor rose to his feet after a moment, careful not to disturb Kale as he shifted slightly away. The absence of weight felt wrong. Too soon. Kale noticed immediately. His ears flicked, his body tensed just slightly, the old pattern threatening to return. Elara caught it. "Don't disappear," she said quietly. Kaelor stilled. "I'm not." "You stepped back," she said. He felt it. Kaelor looked down. Kale was watching him again, not fearful, not aggressive, just uncertain, waiting for the next signal. Kaelor stepped forward again, closing the distance. The effect was immediate. Kale relaxed, just like that. No escalation, no growl, no tension. Kaelor exhaled slowly. "So it really is that simple," he said. Elara met his gaze. "It's not simple," she corrected gently. "It's consistent." That difference settled heavily, because consistency was not something power could command. It had to be chosen, repeated, proven, over time. Kaelor nodded once. "I understand." And this time, he did. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just full, the kind of quiet that came after something fundamental had shifted. Kaelor studied Elara for a moment longer. "You stayed," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. She tilted her head slightly. "Yes, you had no reason to," he continued. "No," she agreed. Celine looked between them, something unreadable flickering in her expression, but she said nothing. Kaelor held Elara's gaze. "Why?" The question lingered, not as a challenge, but as something genuine. Elara didn't answer immediately. She glanced at Kale, now sitting calmly between them, tail moving in slow, contented arcs. Then, back at Kaelor. "Because he turned around," she said. Kaelor frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Elara's voice softened. "When something small and scared makes a sound," she said, "and hopes someone will turn around." She paused. "That someone should. The simplicity of it struck deeper than anything else she had said. Not strategy, not training, not instinct. Choice. Kaelor felt it settle somewhere inside him, quiet, but permanent. He gave a small nod. Not as a king, not as an alpha, just as a man who had finally understood something he should have known all along. Kael made another small sound, softer now, almost playful. Elara smiled. "There it is," she said. And this time, Kaelor smiled too. Barely, but enough. Word spread before the sun reached its highest point. It didn't move like an announcement. There were no formal declarations, no royal summons echoing through the halls. It moved the way truth always did inside a closed stronghold, quietly, rapidly, and impossible to contain. By mid-morning, the guards had their version. The air stood down. One said voice, low but urgent. No command, no force, just stopped. Another shook his head, not stopped, sat. I saw the feed. He sat. In the lower kitchens, it changed again. The Omega girl fed him honey, and he obeyed. By the time it reached the physician's wing, it had sharpened into something closer to reality and far more dangerous. She didn't control him, the head physician muttered, pacing his office. She understood him. That word lingered. Understood. It was not part of any protocol, not part of any report, and yet it explained everything the reports had failed to. Requests began before noon, carefully worded at first. Respectful, indirect, then less so. By early afternoon, 12 separate families had reached out through different channels, guards aides, even council intermediaries. Each message carried the same unspoken truth. They had cubs, and those cubs had been labeled difficult, aggressive, unmanageable. They had followed protocol, and it hadn't worked. Now they wanted something else. They wanted what had happened in the East Corridor. Elara stood in the herb room doorway, reading the stack of messages in her hands, her expression unreadable. Kael sat just outside the threshold, waiting, not restless, not pacing, just present. Every time she shifted, his eyes followed. Every time she spoke, his ears flicked. A quiet shadow, a choice. "I already gave you honey," she said absently without looking up. Kael responded immediately, a small growl, softer than before, controlled, intentional, better. Elara's lips curved faintly. "Much improved," she said. That one had depth. His tail moved. Inside the room, the messages waited. 12 families, 12 versions of the same problem. 12 chances to be wrong again. Or right. She exhaled slowly, then set the stack aside, because she already knew something important. This wasn't about fixing cubs. It was about changing how they were seen. The door behind her opened without warning. Elara didn't turn immediately. She recognized the presence before the sound, the shift in the air, the quiet weight of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Alpha King Kaelor stepped into the room, alone, again. "You've been requested," he said. Elara finally turned. "I've noticed." He studied her for a moment, not as a ruler assessing a subject, but as someone trying to understand something he couldn't command. 12 families, he said. "Yes, they want your help. They want what happened," she corrected gently. Kaelor inclined his head slightly. "That's fair." There was a pause, not tense, but deliberate. Elara crossed her arms lightly. "I'm an apprentice herbalist," she said. "Not a pack counselor, not a cub specialist. You told us what we needed to hear." Kaelor replied, "That doesn't make me qualified. It makes you effective." That landed, not as flattery, as recognition. Elara held his gaze. "And when I tell them something they don't want to hear," she asked. "When I tell a senior pack member that their approach is the problem," Kaelor didn't hesitate. "They won't ignore you. You say that now. I will put it in writing." The room stilled slightly, because that wasn't a casual offer. That was power. Formal, recognized, protected. Elara studied him carefully. "What are you offering?" she asked. Kaelor's voice was steady. "A position, not honorary, not symbolic, real. Name it," he added. Elara didn't respond immediately. Her gaze drifted briefly toward the doorway, where Kael still sat watching, waiting completely at ease. Then back to Kaelor. "Pack Cub liaison," she said. The words settled into the space between them. "New, Unfamiliar. Necessary. Kaylor nodded once. Done. No hesitation. No negotiation. Alara blinked slightly. You agreed to that very quickly. I decided before I came here, he said. Why? Kaylor followed her earlier glance, his eyes resting briefly on his son, on the calm, the stillness, the absence of fear, then back to her. Because you were right about the only thing that mattered, he said quietly. Alara didn't look away. And that's enough, she asked. For this, Kaylor said. Yes, there was no doubt in his voice, no second guessing, because he had seen the proof with his own eyes. Not in theory, not in report. In reality, Alara exhaled slowly. Then I want more than a title. Kaylor waited. A proper herb garden, she said immediately. The current one is poorly arranged, and the north beds don't get enough light. Done. Full access to medical stores for cub-related preparations. Done. And authority, she added. Not implied. Not assumed. Real. If I say something needs to change, it changes. Kaylor held her gaze. Done. 3 times. No resistance. No condition. Alara studied him for a long moment. You're very certain, she said. I am, he replied. Why? Kaylor's expression shifted, subtle but real. Because I spent 4 months being certain about the wrong thing, he said. Silence followed. Not heavy. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. Kale made a small sound from the doorway. Alara glanced at him, then back at Kaylor. This doesn't fix everything, she said. I know. It takes time. I know. It will be uncomfortable. Kaylor almost smiled. I expect it to be. Alara nodded once. Good. Because that meant he understood. Not just the result, but the process. Outside the room, footsteps passed more frequently now. Voices lower, quieter, watching, waiting. The stronghold was shifting. Not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. And at the center of it was an Omega girl who had simply turned around when something small made a sound. Kaylor stepped back toward the doorway. He paused briefly beside Kale. This time he didn't hesitate. He reached down, scratched lightly behind his ear. Natural, less uncertain. Kale leaned into it instantly. Tail moving. Content. Kaylor straightened again, then looked at Alara one last time. Tomorrow, he said, the council will formalize your position. Alara nodded. I'll be in the East Garden, she replied. Kaylor inclined his head slightly, then left. No guards, no announcement, just quiet certainty. Kale remained where he was, watching her, waiting. Alara picked up the stack of messages again. 12 families, 12 chances. She glanced down at him. You're starting something, she said softly. Kale didn't understand the words, but he understood her voice. He made a small sound in response, satisfied. And for the first time, Alara felt it too. Not just responsibility, something deeper, something that had been quiet inside her for a long time. Beginning to wake, the garden felt different at dawn. Not quieter, not softer, just more honest. The early light filtered through the eastern wall, touching the rows of herbs with a warmth the rest of the stronghold never quite managed to hold. Dew clung to the edges of leaves, catching gold in the rising sun. Alara was already there, kneeling beside the southern beds, her hands steady as she sorted through bundles of dried stems, separating what could still be used from what needed to be replaced. Routine, grounding, necessary. Behind her, Kale sat exactly where he had been for nearly an hour, watching, not restless, not demanding, just present. He had arrived before the 7th bell, alone, and stayed, because this place, this garden, this quiet space where no one stepped back from him, had already become something he understood. Safe. Alara didn't turn when she heard footsteps approaching. She knew who it was, not by sound, by presence, by the subtle shift in the air that came with people who were trying, really trying not to disturb something fragile. Kaylor and Celine stopped at the edge of the garden. No guards, no attendants, just them. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because what they were looking at didn't feel like something they should interrupt. Kale noticed them first. His ears flicked. His body straightened slightly, not tense, not defensive. Aware, hopeful, Celine exhaled slowly, her hand tightening slightly at her side. He's waiting, she whispered. Not for guards, not for commands. For them. Kaelor stepped forward first this time. No hesitation, no pause. He crossed the space between them and his son with a quiet certainty that hadn't been there the day before. Kael watched him closely, reading, always reading. Kaelor stopped just in front of him, then lowered himself again, not because he had to, because he chose to. "Good morning," he said. The words were simple, but they carried something entirely new. Consistency. Kael didn't hesitate this time. He stepped forward immediately and pressed his head into his father's hand. No testing, no waiting, just trust. Celine followed, kneeling beside them, her fingers brushing gently along Kael's shoulder. "I've been thinking about you," she said softly, her voice steadier now, still emotional, but no longer breaking. Kael leaned into her touch as easily as he had the day before, as if the distance that had once defined them had never existed at all. Elara watched from the garden bed, her hands still moving through the herbs, her expression calm, but her attention never wavered. "Try the cord," she said after a moment. Kaelor glanced at her, then nodded once. He reached into the small pouch at his side, something he had added that morning without quite realizing why, and pulled out a length of braided string, not identical to Elara's, but close enough. He let it hang loosely between his fingers. Kael's eyes locked onto it instantly, focused, sharp, alive. The shift was immediate, but controlled. Kaelor felt it, recognized it now, not as danger, as engagement. "Go on," he said. Kael crouched, muscles coiling, timing, watching. Then he moved, fast, precise. He caught the cord cleanly, claws sheathed, control perfect. And then he looked up, not at Elara, at Kaelor, waiting. Kaelor didn't hesitate. "That was good," he said. Not loud, not commanding, just clear, real. Kael's body relaxed instantly, tail moving, soft, satisfied. Celine let out a quiet laugh, half disbelief, half relief. "He's different," she said. Elara shook her head slightly. "No," she corrected gently. "He's the same." Celine looked at her, confused. Elara's gaze returned to Kael. "You're just seeing him now." That landed, deeper than anything else had. Kaelor felt it settle in his chest, heavy but not painful. Just true. He reached out again, his hand, finding the place behind Kael's ear, without hesitation this time. Natural, practiced, earned. Kael leaned into it immediately, the low rumble building in his chest again. Contentment. Celine watched them both, something shifting in her expression. Not grief, not regret. Something quieter, something steadier. Hope. Kaelor exhaled slowly. When was the last time he sounded like that? He asked. Celine didn't answer, because they both knew. He hadn't. Not like this. Not freely. Not without fear. Kael shifted again, moving slightly between them, his small body pressing into both at once, without hesitation, claiming space, taking what had always been his. Kaelor didn't move away. Neither did Celine. They adjusted around him instead, making room. Elara's hand stilled briefly in the soil. She watched them, not as a ruler, not as an outsider, but as someone witnessing something that mattered. "He kept looking toward the doors yesterday," she said quietly. Selena glanced up. "He was checking if you were coming." Celine's breath caught. Kaelor's hand stilled for just a moment against Kael's fur, then resumed. Gentler now, more deliberate. "He doesn't have to check anymore," Celine whispered. No, Elara agreed. "He doesn't." The garden settled into a quiet rhythm after that. Not silence, but something better. The soft rustle of leaves, the steady sound of breathing, the small contented noises of a cub who no longer needed to shout to be heard. Kaelor glanced toward Elara after a while. "You were right," he said. She didn't look up immediately. "About what?" "About all of it." That made her pause, not because she doubted it, because she understood what it meant for him to say it. She brushed the dirt from her hands and stood slowly. "That doesn't matter," she said. Kaelor frowned slightly. "It does." Elara met his gaze. "What matters," she said, "is what you do with it." There was no challenge in her voice, no demand, just truth. Kaelor held her gaze, then nodded once. "We show up," he said. "Every day. Not as a promise, as a decision." Elara studied him for a moment, then inclined her head slightly. "Good." Kale made a small sound between them. Soft, playful, almost a question. Kaelor smiled, more clearly this time. Again he asked. Kale's tail moved. The answer was obvious. Selene laughed softly. Again she agreed. Elara turned back to her herbs, her hands moving once more through the leaves and stems. But something had shifted, not just in the garden, not just in the family behind her. Something inside her. Quiet, careful, waking. And in the morning light, with the scent of lavender and earth rising around her, she allowed herself the smallest smile. Because sometimes, all it took was someone choosing to turn around. By evening, the stronghold felt different. Not quieter, not calmer, but changed in a way no one could quite explain. Guards still walked their routes. Orders were still given. The council still debated policy behind closed doors. And yet, something fundamental had shifted beneath it all. In the lower halls, conversations lingered longer than usual. In the training yards, movement slowed not from hesitation, but from thought. And in more than one quiet corner of the stronghold, someone turned around when they heard a sound they would have ignored before. It didn't spread like fear. It spread like recognition. In the east garden, the light had softened into gold. Elara remained among the herbs, her hand slower now, her work nearly done. Kale lay stretched across the grass beside her, sleeping, deep, untroubled. The kind of sleep that only came when something inside finally felt safe enough to rest. His breathing was steady, even, no tension in his limbs, no sharp flick of ears at distant sounds. Just peace. Kaelor stood a few steps away watching him, not as a king observing his heir, not as a leader assessing risk. As a father, Selene stood beside him, her hand resting lightly against his arm. Neither of them spoke for a while, because there was nothing to add to what was already there. He didn't fall asleep like this before. Selene said quietly. Kaelor shook his head once. No, before sleep had been restless, short, interrupted by instinct that never fully released its hold. But this was different. This was what should have been there from the beginning. Kaelor exhaled slowly. I thought I was protecting him, he said. Selene didn't answer right away, because she had thought the same. We both did, she said finally. Elara didn't look up from the herbs. I know, she said. No accusation, no correction, just understanding. Kaelor glanced at her. And we were wrong. The words didn't come easily, but they came, fully, without defense. Elara brushed a final bit of soil from her hands and stood. She looked at Kale for a moment. Really looked. Then at Kaelor. You weren't wrong about the danger, she said. That made him pause. You were wrong about what it meant. Silence followed, not heavy, not sharp, just clarifying. Kaelor considered that. The difference between seeing something and understanding it. Kale shifted slightly in his sleep, a small sound leaving him. Not a growl, not a warning. Something softer, something unfinished. Kaelor's attention sharpened immediately. What was that, he asked. Elara's expression softened. That's the sound he's been trying to make, she said. Kaelor frowned slightly. It didn't sound like a growl. It wasn't, Elara replied. She stepped closer, stopping just beside Kale. For months he's been reaching for something, she said quietly. Something he didn't have words for. Selene's fingers tightened slightly around Kaelor's arm. And now, Elara glanced down at the sleeping cub. Now he doesn't have to force it anymore. Kaelor looked at his son again, at the relaxed line of his body, at the absence of tension, at the quiet rise and fall of his chest, and something inside him settled. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to know that this was real. Kale made the sound again, softer this time. Closer to something else, something that wasn't fear, wasn't dominance, wasn't warning. Kaelor knelt beside him instinctively. His hand hovered for a moment, then lowered, resting gently against Kale's back. Steady, present. Kale's breathing shifted slightly, then steadied again, deeper, more relaxed. Elara watched quietly. He's not practicing to be dangerous, she said. Kaelor looked up at her, then back at his son. No, he said slowly, understanding finally settling into place. He's practicing to be brave. The words stayed there, between them. Simple, clear, true. Celine knelt beside him, her hand joining his on Cale's back. Together. No distance, no hesitation. Cale didn't wake. He didn't need to, because whatever he had been trying to say for months had finally been heard. The garden grew quieter as the light faded. Not empty, just complete. Elara turned back to her work, gathering the last of the herbs into her basket. But before she stepped away, she paused, just for a moment, her gaze resting briefly on the small family behind her, on the Alpha King, who had learned to kneel without losing his strength, on the Queen, who had learned to reach without fear, on the cub who no longer needed to growl to be seen, and something inside her, something that had been silent for a very long time, made a sound of its own, not loud, not demanding, just present, alive. She didn't name it, didn't need to, because she recognized it, the same way she had recognized the sound behind her in the corridor, the same way she had known to turn around. Some things didn't need explanation. They just needed someone to notice and answer. The first growl had echoed through the corridor like a warning, something to fear, something to contain, something to silence. But it hadn't been any of those things. It had been a call, a small, uncertain sound from something that didn't know how else to be heard. And this time, someone had turned around. If you've ever been the one unheard, if you've ever had to become louder just to be seen, or if you've ever realized too late that someone was only asking to be understood, then you already know. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop, listen, and answer.